Welcome to Novara Live. Coming up tonight, Donald Trump's illegal war in Iran continues to isolate the United States as Keir Starmer says he is, quote, fed up with the president's impact on UK energy costs. Trump's going nuclear on his former MAGA allies, publishing his shit list on Truth Social. Melania Trump is denying having ever known Jeffrey Epstein. A clash between Peter Hitchens and Zoe Strimpel reveals the divide between conservatives over the war in Iran. And finally, the Greens are predicted to have another surprise victory. I'm Helena, aka No Justice MTG, and tonight, on an excellent and very, very sunny Friday, I'm joined by Stephen Methven. Stephen, how you doing?
I'm okay. I'm glad to be alive in a week where just a few days ago it looked like the US was going to, threaten genocide in Iran, right? Take out a civilization. Hasn't come to that, thank goodness. Talks happening tomorrow, but otherwise, yeah.
True, but at least we're clear in the knowledge here that Melania Trump is going to be putting all of those rumours to one side, right?
I mean, thank God for that.
Honestly, the real issues being covered in the White House.
That is the news.
Very much so, very much so. Speaking of the news, before we go to that, and maybe the final show of the week, but you can still let us know your thoughts over the weekend by filling in the Novara Media Audience Survey. We won't just be here to remind you, all of our feedback so far has been invaluable. We're constantly working to improve the show, and hearing from you helps us do exactly that. So if you haven't had the chance to share your thoughts yet, please don't miss out. If you complete it in the next 3 days, you can be in with a chance to win £50 to spend in the merch store. Just make sure that you submit your responses by 11:59 p.m. this Sunday. We genuinely can't emphasize enough how important your feedback is as we prepare to take a next big step. So head to novara.media/survey or follow the link in the description to complete that as well. US Vice President J.D. Vance has departed for Islamabad, Pakistan, where negotiations with Iran over a ceasefire are set to take place on Saturday. He'll be joined by Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner, as well as his special envoy Steve Witkoff. From the Iranian side, Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf and Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi will be leading the talks, with Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif's government mediating. This was Vance speaking to the press before boarding Air Force Two today.
We're looking forward to the negotiation. I think it's going to be positive. We'll, of course, see. As the President of the United States said, if the Iranians are willing to negotiate in good faith, we're certainly willing to extend the open hand. If they're going to try to play us, then they're going to find that the negotiating team is not that receptive. So we're going to try to have a positive negotiation. The President has gave us some pretty clear guidelines, and we're going to see.
The terms of the ceasefire negotiations are already being publicly contested by both sides. On Wednesday, Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz in response to Israel's horrific bombings of Lebanon, in which over 300 people were killed as Israel bombed densely populated civilian areas. Both Iran and Pakistan say that an end to the assault on Lebanon was a key term of the truce. The US has denied this, with Vance quoted calling it a legitimate misunderstanding. But on Thursday evening, Araghchi posted his theory of why Israel won't respect a truce, saying this. Netanyahu's criminal trial resumes on Sunday. A region-wide ceasefire, including in Lebanon, would hasten his jailing. If the US wishes to cater to its economy by letting Netanyahu kill diplomacy, that would ultimately be its choice. We think that would be dumb, but we are prepared for it. That was in response to J.D. Vance saying it would be, quote, dumb for Iran to include Lebanon in the ceasefire negotiations. Also on Thursday night, US President Donald Trump was railing against the closure of the strait on Truth Social, posting this. Iran is doing a very poor job, dishonorable, some would say, of allowing oil to go through the Strait of Hormuz. That is not the agreement we have, President Donald J. Trump. The Islamabad negotiations are, ultimately, the US negotiating to end the illegal war it started with Israel. Far from having destroyed the Iranian government, as Trump and his War Secretary Pete Hegseth have frequently declared, the US administration is now meeting with them to agree terms. The Washington Post reports that one thing the Americans will be asking for is the release of around 6 US prisoners being held in Iran. Though in a sign of how tenuous the talks are likely to be, insiders have said the US team won't pursue the request if talks prove difficult. However these talks go, one thing is pretty clear. The standing of the US on the world stage has never been worse, with allies clearly trying to distance themselves from the current administration. Speaking to ITV, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer condemned Trump in the strongest terms yet.
The consequences of this war are going to be long felt. They're already being felt in the United Kingdom. They're going to be long felt. And we can't immunise ourselves from that. We can work on the ceasefire. We can work on getting the streets open, which is in our national interest because the impact on our economy, particularly on energy, is already clear to see. I'm fed up with the fact that families across the country see their bills go up and down on energy. Businesses' bills go up and down on energy because of the actions of Putin or Trump across the world.
Yes, you heard that right. That was Starmer naming Trump in the very same breath as Russian President Vladimir Putin. Starmer is in the Gulf currently, where he is speaking to leaders of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE and Bahrain over the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. But some of those states may also be reconsidering their relationship with the United States after they were drawn into the country's illegal war, with Iran retaliating against them for housing US bases. This is from The Guardian. In recent months, Saudi Arabia forged a defense pact with Pakistan and the UAE, and announced a defense partnership with India. During this conflict, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar hurriedly signed defense agreements with Ukraine to tackle the threat from Iranian drones. There have been calls for a Muslim NATO, but the idea is considered highly unlikely. A new alignment emerged in March of Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt, and Pakistan. However, the rivalries between these countries and the lack of clarity on whether they're protecting against Iran or Israel complicates the relationship. Turkey and Pakistan border Iran and do not want to see confrontation with Tehran. The UK, which helped defend Gulf skies during the war, could also be involved. Arriving in Jeddah on Wednesday, Keir Starmer discussed with the Saudi Crown Prince how the UK and Saudi Arabia could further deepen their defence industrial cooperation to boost capability and mutual security. Those states have also been economically worse off by the US-Israeli adventure. Iran has said it intends to continue to exercise control over the Strait of Hormuz, meaning the country could cut it off at will. But with the exception of Saudi Arabia, which has Red Sea ports and a pipeline, the Gulf states are heavily dependent on the strait to get their oil, liquid natural gas, and other products into the wider world. Europe is also likely to feel an economic shock soon. The Airports Council International has warned that many airports in the UK and Europe are just 3 weeks away from running short of jet fuel, saying that unless the strait is reopened soon, quote, systemic jet fuel shortage is set to become a reality for the European Union. The Catholic Church has also criticised the war, with Pope Leo posting this today. God does not bless any conflict. Anyone who is a disciple of Christ, the Prince of Peace, is never on the side of those who once wielded the sword and today drops bombs. A military action will not create space for freedom or times of peace, which comes only from patient promotion of coexistence and dialogue among peoples. Stephen, wise words by the Pope there, certainly wise words. Although, to be fair, when it comes to when we've seen with Gulf countries looking towards to detangle themselves from this kind of US military kind of sphere that it has really kind of locked itself in with over the past 20 years or so, is a kind of a real sign of hubris, in my opinion, around the fact that, well, it's not new for America to destabilize countries in the region. It's not new for America to want to do regime change and cause geopolitical instability, as it did with the war in Iraq 20 years ago. And the idea that somehow this is a recent development that could have undermined this defense agreement, again, they could have been looking at mutual defense with their neighbors more sooner than this, couldn't they?
I mean, they could have done, but you know, I can see the position that they're in, right? The US has until very recently been the partner that everyone wants to partner with in order to sort of move into its sphere of influence, which is a very profitable sphere to be in large. And you know, of course, you know, they'll have known that the US has engaged in regime change in the past, that it's always had an interest in, like, you know, keeping that region sort of fairly unstable, that Israel is there, which is also, you know, deeply interested in keeping that region very unstable. But they'll have dealt with US presidents in the past, US administrations in the past, with whom, you know, they were treated as partners. And it's very unclear that that's what's happened in this case, that there was much warning about what was going to happen, that this attack, that they were sort of clued into the attack or consulted at all about the launch of this illegal war in Iran, one that the US appears to have been bounced into by Israel, although we don't know that for sure, but it seems quite likely. And I think it's just, you know, we just don't live in a sufficiently multipolar world at the moment, such that any other defense deals could offer what the US does, even though there are those risks attached to partnering with the US of the kind that we've seen now. But I think actually as a gamble, you know, it would the odds of this happening would probably look pretty low at the outset.
I mean, in that regards, do you think, obviously, given that this is, in your mind, a very new thing that happened with the Trump administration breaking apart all of these perceived norms of the recent past, obviously he's only got, you know, 2 and a bit years left of his time in office. Do you think that should, for example, the Democrats win in 2028, do you think that could potentially draw them back in? Could there be could this be a blip that then gets returned to the normality, or do you think this is broken for definite?
I don't think any of them are going to leave the kind of security deals that they have at the moment with the US. I think they might add other things to it. I think they might sort of look to bolster their security by regional partnerships of the kind that were described in that piece from The Guardian. So I don't think that they're going anywhere. But what they have learned is that this war, this stupid, idiotic war, has unleashed a whole new reality, which has actually strengthened Iran significantly. Because what Iran has learned is that it now can control the Strait of Hormuz. Nobody can really do anything about it. That helps it to deal with an asymmetry of power that has existed. It helps it to have some kind of leverage over those Gulf states as well, because as you said in that piece, they are highly dependent on access to the wider ocean through that strait. All of their oil, all of their liquid natural gas, fertilizer, helium, all the sort of things that they put out into the world requires that strait, which Iran has never closed before until now. And now that it's done it, and it's seen that actually it's impossible to force it to reopen it. Once it makes the closure, it can disrupt that shipping very easily, not even through necessarily blowing anything up, but just by scaring insurers. That's a new reality. And that's a new reality that the Gulf states are going to be really acutely aware of now. And that they can't, and it's a new reality that the US, along with Israel, has thrust them into. And so when it looks to these new kind of security bilateral deals with other security partners, what it'll be thinking a lot about is the fact that Iran is now, in some sense, although obviously it's taken a lot of damage through the bombing campaign and the destruction of the leadership in some of the leadership in Iran and so on. It has become more powerful because it now has this knowledge and this ability that it didn't have before. And the US has not been reliable in getting it to open up. And in fact, the US has been incredibly stupid. I'll just read you something that Trump put out just before we went on air, where he said, "The Iranians don't seem to realize they have no cards other than a short-term extortion of the world by using international waterways. The only reason they are alive today is to negotiate." President Donald J. Trump. I mean, they're not the only ones negotiating, right? The US is negotiating too. So it's this idea that, again, there's this threat of you don't negotiate, you don't do what we want to do, we're going to bomb you to smithereens, we're going to get rid of you. There's a threat that just hasn't worked. The straits are still closed. They're going to be closed until Iran decides that they're going to open it. And there's nothing that can be done to change that. And that is a very new and shocking reality for those Gulf states.
That's true. That's very true. Do you think as well that this new reality that's been created, these kind of bilateral deals, is this a manifestation of what Mark Carney was talking about at Davos, about middle powers coming together to create mutually beneficial arrangements to try and defend against the kind of the coming new order that's been created?
I mean, I don't know about those bilateral security deals, but I definitely think that's what Starmer is doing by being in the Gulf at the moment. So he's touring those Gulf states to talk about the ways in which the strait can be reopened. And I think that is him, sort of actually in the comments he made about Trump and Putin, it's really him sort of setting the UK up as a leader amongst those middle countries. So again, a move away from the sense of us being this, solid ally to the US, which kind of gets its power in the world through its relationship to the US. It's now this idea, no, we're going to operate independently as a kind of broker for states who are, suffering the impacts of this war. I don't think this will be permanent, though. I mean, it's all very well Starmer speaking tough on Trump. I think there's probably a political calculation that's been made, which is that what's happened here is that there's been a breach of international law through this war. There's been the threat of crimes against humanity made by the US president. And it's probably reached a point at which the calculation is something like, in order to get on with the next administration, the UK has got to distance itself from this one. You can't sort of be full Trumpian, full supporter of Trump through all of that and expect a new administration, which is going to, I would imagine, try to prosecute or try to at least make great political capital out of the kinds of mistakes that Trump has made here. You can't expect to get on with them if you haven't yourself distance yourself from the person who is going to be the target of future administrations' legal, political fighting.
True, and because there is certainly a lot of antipathy towards the Trump administration. And as we are about to talk about, not just from his opponents, but also his former allies.
Do not trust her. She is a fugly slut.
Scenes from the White House there, as US President Donald Trump published his own personal burn book on Truth Social last night. Taking aim at those former media allies who've now turned on him, Trump didn't hold back, writing these 482 words on the subject. And I do apologize, I will be doing the impression. I know why Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, Candace Owens, and Alex Jones have all been fighting me for years, especially by the fact they think this is so wonderful for Iran, the #1 state sponsor of terror, to have a nuclear weapon, because they have one thing in common: low IQs. They're stupid people, they know it, their families know it, and everyone else knows it too. Look at their past, look at their record. They don't have what it takes, and they never did. They've all been thrown off television, lost their shows, and aren't even invited on TV because nobody cares about them. They're nut jobs and troublemakers, and will say anything necessary for some free and cheap publicity. Now they think they can get some clicks because they have third-rate podcasts, but no one's talking about them, and their views are the opposite of MAGA, or I wouldn't have won the presidential election in a landslide. MAGA agrees with me and just gave CNN a 100% approval rating of Trump, not hand-flailing fools like Tucker Carlson, who couldn't even finish college. He was a broken man when he got fired from Fox, and he's never been the same. Perhaps you should see a good psychiatrist, or Megyn Kelly, who nastily asked me how the famous only Rosie O'Donnell question, or crazy Candace Owens, who accuses the highly respected First Lady of France of being a man when she is not, and will hopefully win lots of money in the ongoing lawsuit. Actually, to me, the First Lady of France is a far more beautiful woman than Candace, in fact, who's not even close. Or bankrupt Alex Jones, who says some of the dumbest things and lost his entire fortune, as he should have, for his horrendous attack on the families of the Sandy Hook shooting victims, ridiculously claiming it was a hoax. These so-called pundits are losers, and they always will be. Now, fake news, CNN, the failing New York Times, and all the other radical left news organizations are hailing them, giving them positive press for the first time in their lives. They're not MAGA, they're losers, just trying to latch on to MAGA. As president, I could get them on my side anytime I want to, when I call. I don't return their calls because I'm too busy on the world and country affairs, and after a few times, they go nasty, just like Marjorie Taylor Brown, but I no longer care about that stuff. I only care about doing right for our country. MAGA's about winning and strength and not allowing Iran to have nuclear weapons. MAGA is about making America great again, and these people have no idea how to do that, but I do, because the United States is now the hottest country anywhere in the world. President.
God, that was heroic. Truly heroic.
President Donald J. Trump. Carlson, Kelly, Owens, and Jones all built enormous MAGA audiences by supporting Trump, though all have gradually turned on the president, mainly over his broken pledge to end foreign wars. Former Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, who was a staunch ally of Trump's, but resigned following her demand that Trump release all of the Epstein files, as well as her criticisms of Israeli financing in US politics. But it was his genocidal threat to wipe out an entire civilization in Iran that earned the president the stronger criticism yet from his former allies.
Now, as you can imagine, that post did not go over well with the Iranians or with many Americans. I mean, I don't know about you, but I am sick of this shit. I'm sick of it. Can't he just behave like a normal human? I mean, honestly, like the president, 3D chess, shut up. Fucking shut up about that shit.
And so unless somebody puts the brakes on right away, we're going to wind up in a place that we can't even imagine. Not just Iran, us and the rest of the world. And so that means, because this is obvious to anyone who's paying any attention, that if you work in the White House or in the U.S. military, now it's time to say no, absolutely not. And say it directly to the president, no. In case you're thinking about using some weapon of mass destruction against the population of Iran, in whose name we liberated Iran, we killed their religious leader for their benefit. Do you remember that? This was last month. Those people who are in direct contact with the president need to say no.
This is a huge black eye to the United States. I'm glad that Trump didn't engage in increased war crimes or, quote, destroy entire civilization. But this thing, 39 days in, is a total and complete disaster, and we have been right about it.
How can any person that is mentally stable call for an entire civilization of people to be murdered, to be wiped out, to never come back again? That's what the president called for. And that shows that there's serious instability.
God, it's a real kind of whiplash hearing the person who once talked about Jewish space lasers sounding, incredibly cogent on the issue of like crazy tweets out from the president calling to wipe out entire civilizations. Real whiplash. Now, for her part, Candace Owens posted this following Trump's threat. The 25th Amendment needs to be invoked. He's a genocidal lunatic. Our Congress and military need to intervene. We are beyond madness. Now, in his post, Trump referred to some polling showing he has a 100% approval rating amongst the MAGA base. That seems to be a reference to a report from CNN that came out late last month.
Yeah, sometimes you look at the polling data and there are numbers that just jump off the screen at you, and this is one of those. Because just take a look here. MAGA GOP view of Trump. Approve 100%. 100%. If you are a member of MAGA and the GOP, you approve of Donald John Trump. 0% say that they disapprove. You don't have to be a mathematical genius to know you can't go higher than 100%.
Of course, there's no formal membership of MAGA. It's a self-identifying group. And the only criteria for being in it is that you support Trump. So no surprise then that 100% of people who support Trump happen to support Trump. But the former MAGA media stars are right when it comes to Americans' views on Trump's genocidal threat. Polling from YouGov shows that just 14% of US voters strongly approved of the statement, with just 9% somewhat approving. Meanwhile, 54% strongly disapproved of it and 10% somewhat disapproved. Broken down by party affiliation, however, Republicans were still behind the president, with more than half strongly or somewhat approving. Just 15% strongly disapproved of his words. But Trump's general approval ratings have never been worse. He now stands at -20, far worse than his approval ratings at this point in his first term. That's the line in orange, and significantly below where Joe Biden stood at this point just 4 years ago. So the critics that Trump targeted seem to be in line with the public mood in the United States, something that the president and his administration are likely to be very worried about as they go into the midterm polls later this year. Some of those that Trump attacked in his post have responded. This was from Candace Owens. It may be time to put Grandpa up in a home.
I supported the old Trump that got so many good things done. But at the end of the day, I just feel sorry for him and pray that God touch his heart and soul and free him from the demonic influences that he's under. I mean, it's just that simple. This is a nightmare. We know the Democrats, the left, are absolutely terrible, but when Trump's calling for wiping out whole civilizations and acting like a supervillain, I have to come out and say I don't support it.
And this was from Marjorie Taylor Greene. President Trump has gone mad as he wages war against Iran, a broken campaign promise. I fought alongside Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, Candace Owens, and Alex Jones to help Trump get elected. And now he goes off on a rambling rant attacking all of us in one post. We never changed. Trump did. America first. Now, I think that this specific tweet, Stephen, is really, really interesting, right? The specific line that I'm talking about here is they say, we never changed, but Trump did. And I think that is true. I think it is definitely true that Trump changed, especially from his campaign rhetoric to how he's been governing. But what I think that they miss, what I think they miss quite a lot, is that we're essentially seeing the neocon wing of the Republican Party back in control all over again, because Trump does whatever the neocons essentially say now from people in his administration. We see Rubio, we see Miller, we see people like Pete Hegseth. These are real straight up neocons, despite all Pete Hegseth's words about regime change failing. What I think they miss, though, is that the same was true in Trump 1. In Trump 1, despite his position being as an iconoclast to the existing Republican neocon administration, fighting them from the inside, now that he's back in control and he's running with those same neocons as part of the Republican Party, as the figurehead rather than as the iconoclast, it would have stood to reason for me. They should have noticed this before now. It was clear when he was campaigning, the people he was allied with and like who he endorsed in the midterms in 2022 and who we kind of put into his cabinet positions right at the start of Trump 2 as well, should have shown these people who he was. And again, I'm glad they're breaking now. They're seeing what the problems were, but everyone outside of the 10 was seeing this already.
Yeah, I'm not sure that they I'm not sure that they are breaking out or that they didn't see it before. I mean, you have to remember, like, all of the people who Trump was criticizing in this tweet, like aggressively criticizing this tweet. Like, let's not forget, they are clowns to a person, all of them. I mean, they're clever clowns, and they all threw themselves behind Trump at various points. And now that it's come to this point where, you know, gradually they've been withdrawing their support, as, for example, they've become, you know, like Megyn Kelly, very interested in like AIPAC, Tucker Carlson as well, MTG as well. But I don't think that they've sort of discovered that Trump is anything different from what he ever was. They were all extremely close to him. They will have known that actually he's extremely amenable to being moved by the people around him, and what they've lost is a kind of battle for influence, and that's become clear, as you said, as he's surrounded himself by various neocons and revealed himself. I'm not sure he is a neocon. I'm not sure he actually has like a political philosophy, to be honest.
No, I think you're right. It is just like an alliance of convenience between the power brokers in the Republican Party and Trump's desire to have access to the power.
Exactly. But what these people are doing, which I think is actually really smart, is that they're looking ahead to when Trump is over. Because what hasn't changed is the existence of the kind of electoral coalition, the MAGA base that got Trump into the White House, especially in the second time. And they'll be thinking, it's very easy to move that base towards a new candidate by pointing out all the things that Trump did, which were not MAGA, where MAGA is this philosophy which is about enriching or, you know, about paying attention to a certain class of people in the US who have been unattended to by Democrat and neocon administrations in the past, and now find themselves unattended to again. And what these people are doing, these media people and Marjorie Taylor Greene, is that they recognize that that base isn't going anywhere. That coalition still exists. It's still going to be there at the next election. What they have to do is then, therefore, and I think what they will do is they will slowly find a candidate that they're going to group themselves around as the real heir to MAGA, as the real heir to that coalition that Trump has failed. And they're setting up that ground already. You know, they're not doing this because they care about international law, and they're not doing this because they're worried about foreign wars. They're doing this because there is this strong base will continue to exist after this administration, and it's there to be taken by somebody else. So I think that's what's really going on. It's sort of looking ahead to how they can galvanize that base around somebody else. Maybe it's going to be Tucker Carlson. I mean, who knows?
What I find quite interesting as well is that the Democrats are nowhere.
Yeah,
But like, this is a base that is ripe to be pulled back by the Democratic Party, by an industrial strategy towards building the manufacturing jobs that Trump pretended to bring back with the tariff policy. But obviously that was never going anywhere because it was tariffing the raw materials that it needed to bring back those jobs, right? And there are certain Democratic Party candidates who do appeal to that demographic, right? You know, obviously I'm not going to endorse Graham Plattner given what we know, but like, that's the kind of candidate who would be receptive to those audiences, and he polls well with them. He's polling well in terms of the main Senate election. And the Democratic Party are doing literally everything possible to push these people away and try and not rig primaries, but like kind of try and push primaries in other direction to support establishment Democratic Party candidates who want nothing to do with it, right?
Yeah, they're busy clustering around Gavin Newsom as well. It's like, as a sort of, you know, like a really, you know, very, very attractive to, like, you know, the JFK crowd, but not that attractive to this kind of voter. They looks out of touch, for example.
Yeah, 100%. So like, I think you're right. The broad problem here for both parties is that this coalition will break apart from Trump in some respects. Some of these people, the anti-war types especially, will. And if Democrats and Republicans broadly as a political bloc, as a corporate-owned political bloc, do not move away from interventionism with endless foreign wars, the forever war, and continual deference to Israel, that coalition will find somebody to move behind. And there's plenty of people out there who could move into that space.
Yeah, I just say one interesting thing about polling about Trump. So, you know, he's not doing great. His approval rating is very low, and is much lower than it should be for, you know, compared to previous term, his first term, and to Biden's term at this stage. But what's really interesting, if you look at the polling with the Democrats, is they're not really making gains from it.
They're even less popular.
Exactly.
They're even less popular.
Exactly. So they managed to somehow like just keep messing it up, even though it's the goal is open. It's like right there waiting. And they're just making no ground, except with particular candidates speaking to the particular communities that they come from, like Mamdani, for example.
Yeah.
Democratic candidate, the Democrats are just not. They're not making any gains. They're not taking advantage of this situation at all. And it really speaks to a kind of problem with the organization of the Democratic Party around the idea of winning rather than around the idea of principles. They're very desperate to win the next presidential election. They're very desperate to win in the midterms, but it's the desperation to win which is driving them, rather than like thinking about exactly what you thought about this base that actually exists, that itself could easily be a Democrat base. Like, it doesn't have to be a Republican base. I mean, not everyone will go with it, but it's people who are looking for a good economic deal, and that's what the Democrats should be offering. That should be their number one line.
Yeah, it should be there. It absolutely should be their bread and butter. And like you say, we have Chuck Schumer looking over his glasses going, I don't think Trump's prosecuted this war in accordance with procedure. And I'm just like, it's an illegal war where they killed school children. Like, you can call this stuff out, but of course they're all basically a bunch of neocons on the right wing of the Democratic Party anyway as well. So yeah, plenty to think about for both parties moving forward. Early yesterday, the White House trailed there was to be a surprise announcement at 6 p.m, and almost immediately the internet went into a frenzy of speculation over what could possibly require such a high-profile trail. Trump had been excoriating NATO the previous day, and NATO chief Mark Rutte had spent Thursday afternoon giving the US president a public brown-nosing. Could Trump be making a major announcement on the alliance? Or was it an update over the fragile ceasefire with Iran and the status of shipping through the Strait of Hormuz? Or potentially even a call for Israel to relent from their campaign of destruction in Lebanon? Well, what actually happened was, let's call it, unusual. Here's what viewers tuned into after the White House live feed began.
Good afternoon. The lies linking me with the disgraceful Jeffrey Epstein need to end today. The individuals lying about me are devoid of ethical standards, humility, and respect. I do not object to their ignorance, but rather I reject their mean-spirited attempts to defame my reputation. I never been friends with Epstein. Donald and I were invited to the same parties as Epstein from time to time, since overlapping in social circles is common in New York City and Palm Beach. To be clear, I never had a relationship with Epstein or his accomplice, Maxwell. My email reply to Maxwell cannot be categorized as anything more than casual correspondence. My polite reply to her email doesn't amount to anything more than a trivial note. I am not Epstein's victim. Epstein did not introduce me to Donald Trump. I met my husband by chance at a New York City party in 1998. This initial encounter with my husband is documented in detail in my book, Melania.
This was all very out of the blue. The world was watching with bated breath over potentially another one of Trump's statements that have the potential to upend geopolitics. And instead, we were greeted with what seemed to be an attempt from Melania Trump to potentially get ahead of some kind of story potentially dropping by her proximity to convicted trafficker Jeffrey Epstein. What kind of allegations was she looking to get ahead of, though? Well, this is what she said.
Numerous fake images and statements about Epstein and me have been circulating on social media for years now. Be cautious about what you believe. These images and stories are completely false. I'm not a witness or a named witness in connection with any of Epstein's crimes. My name has never appeared in court documents, depositions, victim statements, or FBI interviews surrounding the Epstein matter. I have never had any knowledge of Epstein abuse of his victims. I was never involved in any capacity. I was not a participant, was never on Epstein's plane, and never visited his private island. I have never been legally accused or convinced of a crime in connection with Epstein's sex trafficking, abuse of minors, and other repulsive behavior. The false smears about me from mean-spirited and politically motivated individuals and entities looking to cause damage to my good name, to gain financially and climb politically, must stop. My attorneys and I have fought these unfounded and baseless lies with success and will continue to maintain my sound reputation without hesitation. To date, several individuals and companies have been legally obligated to publicly apologize and retract their lies about me, such as Daily Beast, James Carville, and HarperCollins UK.
Now, what we do know is that she did as she said, send a single email to Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's imprisoned accomplice, in 2002. A redacted email to Maxwell from the Epstein files, signed off with "Love Melania," discusses a story from New York Magazine, and as she says, some trivial mentions of visits to New York and Palm Beach. As for the supposed fake photos and statements about her and Epstein that she says have been circulating social media, one can only speculate about what she's referring to. Many AI-generated photos of the two will undoubtedly have been shared by pernicious online actors. The claim that does require some scrutiny, however, is of when Melania and the president first met each other, of which there are some competing accounts. Melania's book states the two met at a party in 1998, which is contradicted by a couple of pieces of evidence. An email to Jeffrey Epstein from the sender redacted from shortly after the 2016 election claimed to have been on Donald Trump's plane the first weekend he met Melania, flying back after the sender was visiting Epstein in Florida. There's also this paragraph from the book entitled by Andrew Lowney that claims Epstein told an author he'd slept with Melania in the back of a limo a year before Donald Trump got together with her on his private plane. Melania's statement last night, however, by reigniting discussions of the Epstein files after they had been duly sidelined by events in the Middle East, have stirred her allies into coming to her defense. Paolo Zampoli, a modeling magnate close to the Trump family, has often been credited as being the one to introduce the two. He called UK journalist Mark Stone last night while they were recording Sky News' Trump 100 podcast.
Obviously very keen on a one-woman mission to distance herself.
Hang on. No, he's trying to call me now. Okay, I'm live on the podcast. Hi, Paolo. How are you? I'm actually in the middle of recording our podcast.
Let's do it. Come on.
Tell me, first of all, what your reaction was when you saw the First Lady's statement.
The First Lady stands out for the people. And of course, she has nothing to do with this, whatever criminal like this. I'm ready to testify in front of Congress if I'm asked and say the truth, because this is totally nonsense.
So you're willing to testify in front of Congress to prove that you were the person that introduced Melania to Donald Trump?
As an American citizen, I'm here to say the truth without any problem.
Fascinating. Paolo, thank you very much. Paolo Zampoli. We'll speak soon. Oh, he's gone. There you go. That was a surprise. Fascinating. He has confirmed to us that he's willing to testify before Congress to prove that he was the person. He couldn't quite tell us how he would prove it, but to prove that he's the person that introduced Melania and Donald.
Now, whilst we're on the subject of testifying to Congress, Melania is not just asking for testimony from those who would absolve her, but put out this plea to Congress regarding Epstein's victims.
Now is the time for Congress to act. Epstein was not alone. Several prominent male executives resigned from their powerful positions after this matter became widely politicized. Of course, this doesn't amount to guilt, but we still must work openly and transparently to uncover the truth. I call on Congress to provide the women who have been victimized by Epstein with a public hearing specifically centered around the survivors. give these victims their opportunity to testify under oath in front of Congress with the power of sworn testimony. Each and every woman should have her day to tell her story in public if she wishes, and then her testimony should be permanently entered into the congressional record. Then, and only then, we will have the truth. Thank you.
Now, it does seem confusing to me, right? So you could see this on one end as somebody who's been impacted by something wanting to shift the narrative back over to the people who matter, which is the victims. But you could also see this as somebody going, well, I need to make sure that my name is completely cleared. So I want all of these people who've been affected by all of this to come up and give their testimony once more to ensure that I personally am absolved by all of this. And also it doesn't make sense to me is the fact that we don't want to bring up the Epstein stuff all over again if we're in the Trump administration, right? Clearly, making this into a big deal increases the scrutiny upon both Melania herself, as she pointed out there, but also upon her husband too. This is all very bizarre. And what's complicated an already bizarre moment in an increasingly car crash nature of Trump's second term is that according to reports, Donald Trump apparently had no idea that his wife was about to publicly resurrect the story that had plagued her first year in office, just as the world's attention was elsewhere. This is from CNN. A person familiar with the matter told CNN that the president was aware that his wife planned to speak, but the president told MS Now shortly afterward that he did not know anything about it. Stephen, this seems completely impossible to untangle to me. I do not know what is going on here because, again, everyone was talking about the Middle East. Everyone was talking about Iran. Everyone was talking about Trump's genocidal comments, right? The Epstein files, which had been plaguing the administration for months and months and months, they hadn't gone away, but they were in the back of people's minds. And now it's gone right up to the top of the headlines again. And Trump himself, I can't imagine a world in which he wouldn't know that the White House was planning to do a statement. No. It was going to be broadcast from there, all of their official channels involving his wife, and go, no idea, none of my business. What's going on? Genuinely, what's going on?
It's very hard to exaggerate how insane this is, because yesterday we were told that the president was going to make some announcement at 6 p.m. US time. And we were sort of trying to anticipate what that was going to be, and we assumed it was going to be something to do with Iran. 6 p.m. Eastern time comes around last night, like 11 o'clock here, and out comes Melania Trump, drawing attention to lies about her that literally nobody was thinking about. And I was like, I watched it and I was like, what lies? What juicy lies about Epstein is she referring to? So of course I immediately started Googling, found out, again, it's not really that much. It's, as far as I can tell, it's like one obviously fake photograph, this claim in the Lowney book, which is, a third-hand claim, and maybe some, online chatter.
This amounts to like scurrilous celebrity gossip rather than the real dangerous claims that people are making about other people, as she mentions, in powerful positions.
Right, of course, exactly, and it just sort of. So then she comes out and she sort of draws everybody's attention to these lies, which then everybody goes and looks up and then can make a judgment for themselves about how plausible they do or don't find them. And my immediate thing was, there was going to be something Trump was going to say about Iran. That's now being cancelled because they've decided it's unwise on the eve of negotiations or whatever for him to come out and make this kind of statement. And so in order to distract from that, they've put Melania out there to talk about Epstein. But then I was like, but wasn't Iran a distraction from Epstein? So you guys have these two. Are we just now forever in this kind of cycle where one of these horrific abuse scandals is going to be, this one horrific abuse scandal is going to be used to distract from this crazy war scandal, which itself will then be used to distract from this horrific abuse cycle. Is this going to be the rest of the presidential term, where it's like one or the other, drawing us from one thing that wants to be avoided to another thing that wants to be avoided and back again? Maybe that's a level of like political strategy. Maybe it is just the idea that actually, if you just keep everybody busy talking about Melania Trump's very weird announcement, then they're not going to be talking about the thing that you really don't want them to be talking about.
I mean, it's very Putin-esque to me, because I know internally in Russian politics, it's been deliberate strategy from the Putin administration to keep things as entropic as possible, to keep the news stories being kind of scurrilous, to ensure that no one really knows where the power lies, so the people who are tired of the entropy want strong leadership, which is what Putin is pushing himself to be, right? The problem with that strategy, that doesn't work when it's your leadership that's coming into question from all of these scurrilous rumors.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, why would you involve like the scurrilous rumors around your own wife? That's what you are trying to do. That just draws the focus, right?
We were discussing this story before we went live, and I was like, did they have like an actual announcement about NATO that they planned for 6 p.m? Then Mark Rutte went, Daddy Trump, please forgive me. You've made the world so safe. And then he's gone, okay, well, we'll cancel that, but we've got this announcement. Josh, throw Melania into the ring, see what she says.
Yeah, that's what we thought yesterday, right? Because it was the announcement came out. I think the announcement of the announcement came out just after he'd met with Rutte, and Rutte was like making these statements about the importance of NATO. And I thought, it's going to be a US withdrawal from NATO. That's what I'm expecting. Yeah. Maybe that was the case. Maybe for some reason as you say, maybe Rutte talked him round. Maybe actually there was the idea that actually probably now is not the time to do that on the eve of these negotiations with Iran, and to sort of alienate your allies who are probably going to need to help with the Strait and whatever. I don't know. I think it's really impossible to understand. The other thing is, it's also surprising the way that Melania drew the attention back to the victims of Epstein and sort of made that plea for them to give their evidence in Congress and for that to enter the congressional record. Because at the same time, you have Nancy Mace just yesterday at the same time, yesterday at some point, talking about how she had seen the client list, which is still being withheld, according to her, by the Department of Justice, and that it had to come out. So if you have this idea that, who knows what's real? But if you have this idea that the Department of Justice is somehow withholding extremely incendiary information from the Epstein files, allegedly with the input of Trump, and then on the other hand, you have his wife saying, let's blow it all open in Congress, in congressional hearings, that doesn't make any sense. I have no idea. It could be, as you said, it could be a Putin-style media strategy of, permanent chaos.
Flooding the zone,
exactly. But it seems to be too much drawing attention to the thing that you don't want to draw attention to.
You'd want to flood the zone when the Iran war was still going on.
Right.
Not just during the ceasefire negotiations. You just move things closer to a position where, petrol prices might go down and geopolitical stability might be coming back. And instead we've gone straight to, as soon as all that stuff continues to calm down, we have a fragile ceasefire, let's talk Epstein. It doesn't make any sense to me. Columnist and author Zoe Strimpel is no stranger to social media virality. She became the Twitter main character last month after being shocked by a pro-Palestine art exhibition in Margate last month. This time, she was on Times Radio to give her take on the US-Israeli war in Iran in a clash with veteran commentator Peter Hitchens.
I'm puzzled here, Kate. I don't understand what it is that Zoe wishes would happen. Does she want?
For a start, I think it's crazy that the Strait of Hormuz is being held hostage by these people.
Well, that's just stuff, isn't it? I want to know what you think the United States and Israel should be doing that they're not doing.
I think it's almost we dare not speak its name, but I don't see how this can be won from the air. I think there has to be,
so you want
do a war, I suppose.
You want troops. You want Israeli and American troops.
It's not that I want troops, Peter.
Well, hang on. I'm just trying to get some idea of what it is.
Yeah, hang on. It's not like
You had a long go. I'm trying to ask you a question, and you talk over me while I'm asking you the question. Can I please ask you the question? Is it the case then that what you want to see is the Israeli army and the United States army to actually invade Iran? Is that your proposal for bringing peace to the Middle East?
Well, can I send it back to you and ask? Do you think negotiations, quote unquote, with a regime as genocidal and sadistic as the Iranians, who have such clear intent, do you think that's going to be effective?
Ah, yes. Famously, diplomacy has never been effective with Iran. They're just unthinking beasts, apparently, according to Strimpel, who do not act rationally, despite the fact we're in this position right now due to a lack of diplomacy from the US and Israel, as Hitchens duly pointed out.
I think the negotiations have been very effective with Iran. I think that 2015 JCPOA was an extremely effective agreement, which placed huge restrictions on Iran's ability to make nuclear weapons, and also removed sanctions and gave a chance for Iranian civil society to recover. If you want the mullahs in Iran to be removed from power, then what you really want to see is, as I've many times said, is a recovery of the Iranian middle class, which can only happen if these sanctions come to an end, which reduce everybody to the most total misery, which you yourself, if you were subjected to, would find completely intolerable. The way in which Western countries impose sanctions on countries such as Iran, lightheartedly, as if it was nothing. We did it to Iraq as well. The destructive misery which this measure imposes on wholly innocent people is disastrous. It's no good name calling. This current war is one which was started in an act taking place during negotiations by the United States and Israel. And they actually started a war while Iran was negotiating. All accounts that we have are that those negotiations were making progress when Iran and Israel decided to launch their attack, when Israel and the United States started to launch their attack on Iran.
God, it's so satisfying to hear somebody, again, living in a Western bubble, going, "I'll just send in troops. I'll just can't negotiate, just do more war," right? Do again, and with an invasion that, as Peter Hitchens rightly point out, started by the US and started by Israel, and just kind of dismissing such claims that it is necessary to engage in such belligerent action rather than engaging in diplomacy. When, as he rightly pointed out, there was a diplomatic meeting in place. We already know that there were apparently really positive talks happening in Oman at the time when Israel launched the first strikes, right? And it's clear that people who don't bother educating themselves about the reality of geopolitics, who think that, as Caroline Lucas pointed out on Question Time, that it's not Grand Theft Auto, this is real people's lives, can really be put into place when they have to confront the reality of what war really means. Now, Strimpel, totally out of her depth there, I might add, responded with incredulity, but was only to be duly slapped down by Hitchens' response.
I don't understand how Peter exactly thinks that a middle class in Iran is going to overthrow hundreds and thousands, this army who have all the weaponry. I mean, how's that going to work?
No, you don't understand it, Zoe. That's exactly your problem. You do not, Zoe, understand anything about Iran. I doubt you've ever been there or know anything much about it or its history. You don't understand what a far more complicated society it is than you believe it to be. The regime loves the hatred and the hostility of the West. It thrives on it. It's what keeps it largely in power. Iran is very close to being a civil society. It has the makings of, as I say, of a strong, independent middle class. If you really seriously want to bring to an end the dismal regime of the Ayatollahs, it seems to me that is what you should encourage. I do not think that armed violence and the frankly crazy idea of sending troops, Israeli or American troops, into Iran has the slightest hope of producing anything other than more blood, more rubble, and more war. And if people really seriously want to think about this, they should think about it. We had an agreement in 2015. It took an awful lot of effort to make. A lot of Iranians, particularly the hardline Iranians, greatly disliked the JCPOA, the agreement, and wanted to end it and were furious about it existing. The people who destroyed it were the Israeli government and Donald Trump. And since then, the world has been on the path to war, which was consummated by Mr. Trump's attack in concert with the Israelis on Iran a month ago. How much use has this been? Can somebody tell me if what you want to see is a free and civilized Iran living in comity with its neighbors in the Middle East? Do you really think that these actions have made that more likely or less likely?
God, I really kind of empathize with Hitchens' frustration there because, again, the talks were in place, right? There was a Khamenei in power who had done a fatwa against nuclear weapons. Pezeshkian was an elected reformist in the government in Iran. And then all of the work that had been done, even with all of the sanctions to try and kind of foment some kind of more prosperous Iranian society, a building of some kind of democracy, because there is, of course, an elected parliament, even with the supreme leader having to give credence to all of the people who were appointed into cabinet positions, into office in lots of places, right? There was a movement towards something happening because of the middle class that Peter Hitchens talks about there. And the bloodthirsty interventionists in Israel and the United States blew all of that up. And have left us in a significantly worse place now with a hardliner in charge, and the more moderate reformist of Pezeshkian. His career is basically over now. It's basically over now because people were pushing pieces around on a chessboard in the minds of Western powers to try and do something that they didn't understand. Stephen, what did you make of those clips we saw there?
I mean, I congratulate Peter Hitchens for having such profound patience. It's always shocking to me to see somebody so openly and in such a state of complete ignorance demand a kind of increase in the hostility or the war, of the military hostility in a country of any kind. You'd sort of think it's such a failure to know what actually happens when you have a war and what the wake of it is. Like how, if you go to war with a country and you invade it, you start killing people, most families will lose somebody. Most families will lose something. You then have an entire society which is poisoned against the person who waged the people who waged that war here, which in this case would be the West or would be Israel. And those societies are already, in Iran, there is already this sense of being somewhat poisoned because of a sanctions regime that has gone on for forever, the impoverishment of its people. And Hitchens is just putting their fairly classic conservative position, which is that the way in which you do reform in a society is that you help with prosperity. That prosperity, trade, so on and so forth, are the ways in which to reform societies. Wars never reform societies; they only destroy them, and then something new emerges. And the result of those sanctions, prior to the Obama deal, and then of course that being torn up, is that it's always the case that when you create a siege, right? When you put a government under siege or a country under siege, what you do is you create a siege mentality in response, right? So governments have to become more autocratic in the face of this kind of economic intervention, this kind of economic warfare. And I've said this before on the show about Cuba, for example. They have to become more autocratic because the very point of those interventions is to create a situation where the people will overthrow the government. Never actually ever happens, really. And instead, what you get then is a government that is paranoid, more violent, more aggressive towards its own people, clamping down on any kind of expression which might indicate people wanting a change of view. The only answer to that is to remove the sanctions from Iran and to sort of, in some sense, you're not talking about like welcoming the IRGC into a wider global community, but you are talking about somehow welcoming the Iranian people into a wider global community, and then, as Hitchens says, building up their own resources, their own ability to alter the society themselves. But we're just in this position now where people really imagine there are only two ways that Iran is going to change. Either it's going to change violently from the outside, or it's going to change violently from the inside. Neither of those outcomes is particularly good for the country or for the people who live there. But nobody seems to care about that.
Or indeed for Europe, you get another refugee crisis. But of course, as Aaron wisely points out many, many times, the right hate refugees, love making more of them. They love making more of them. The thing is, what's crazy about all of this is that there's already precedents. This is not like they're going into the unknown. We saw what happened with Iraq. Speaking of Aaron, he shared an article from the Free Press on Twitter today, which was like, well, this is not going to be like Iraq. Iran is going to be different. I'm just like, how many times do these people have to be wrong? How many times these people have to be wrong before they see that all they do when they do these kind of things is massive destabilization, refugee crisis, scores and scores of people lose their lives, and then power vacuums get filled with even more hardline or even more incendiary figures like we saw in Iraq with the rise of ISIS. That's the reality of regime change, and all you're doing is creating a bigger axis of those who despise the United States, who despise the broader kind of liberal West, these people want them to emulate. And in fact, all it's going to do is push them away. Yesterday afternoon, Green Party leader Zach Polanski launched his party's local election campaign, and he invoked some rhetoric we've all become used to since their shocking by-election win in Gorton and Denton.
Because the battle lines are drawn. This election is between the Green Party and the Reform Party. It is a straight-up battle between hope and hate. Reform, the party of war, the party of high bills, the party of corporate backers, versus the Green Party, the party of hope, hope with a plan, and that plan starts with the homes that people need.
Now it's become commonplace for parties who oppose reform or the Tories to position themselves as the sole alternative to woo tactical voters. Labour tried this too in Gorton and Denton, only to be pushed into third place. The question is, how much can this be extrapolated for the Greens? Well, Polanski then went on to make an ambitious proposal.
So yesterday, as you'd expect, I was getting ready for the launch today, where I'm giving this speech, and then lots of interviews. But there's a party in Kent, in Cliftonville, that has a huge council election today. It's the Green Party versus Reform. Now, the Greens came fourth in this election last time, and it's a place that, if you looked on it on paper, should be solid Nigel Farage territory. Thanet is there. It should have been a Reform heartland. But I spoke to the local party, and they've told me it is on a knife edge. Now, it would be foolish of me here to come and make any predictions, but even a second place in Cliftonville would be a pretty incredible result. But I turned up last night. I got a train. It took about 3 or 4 hours. We should do something about the state of trains in this country. Side note. Right. And when I arrived, there were 400 people on the beach. 400 people for a rally that had been organised with less than 24 hours' notice for a council election in Margate. And I think the reason why that's happening is people are rejecting the old party politics of Labour and Conservative, but they can see the divisive, the toxicity, and the awful politics that the Reform Party are trying to bring to this country in our councils. And we as a Green Party are the last stand against that. We can reject the hate of reform, and instead we can bring in a politics that actually benefits people's lives, that improves their living standards, lowers bills, and redistributes power and wealth from the super wealthy into our communities.
Well, he's certainly good at rhetoric, but he's right to say that this area should be a real reform stomping ground, and that the Greens going from fourth to even second would be a good result. The seat was contested in May last year, with Reform garnering 40% of the vote, with the Labour Party in second on 22%, and the Greens far away in fourth, as Zach has pointed out. The standard logic here would be that the opposition to reform would come from the second-place Labour Party, and that attempts to court voters by the Greens would split the vote further, rather than consolidate it. Well, we had the result this morning. It's quite an upset. The Green Party didn't just win, they came first by over 5 points with almost 39% of the vote, and now it's the Labour Party who languish in fourth place. Obviously, all the caveats that this is just a council by-election, but even Labour bringing Emily Thornberry with them to campaign, and for her to proclaim that a vote for anyone else would risk vindicating reform, they couldn't stop the Green tide. Stephen, there are lots of Labour councillors all across the country, lots of Labour MPs in the Houses of Commons, and they will be running as incumbents in a lot of seats where I think this dynamic will play out even further, where Labour will essentially say, we're the incumbents, we have a right to be able to stand and to campaign as hard as possible, even though their vote share could collapse so much that the Greens will leapfrog them, not just them, but also other their competitors as well, potentially. And we're going to hear so many people say, well, you can't split the vote by voting Green. This shows that they could be wrong, doesn't it?
It sort of shows that they could completely be wrong. Also, I think the Green. I think it's important to try to diagnose why it is that people are voting for the Green Party in such big numbers at the moment, when they could be voting for Labour, right? So you'd think. Oh,
they're all Trotskyists, right? They're all Trotskyists and cranks and student politics.
Exactly. No, why are they doing it? And well, it seems to me like the positive takeaway is that people don't want, are moving away from, well, what they want to do is they want like a profound rejection of reform, right? That's the kind of politics of hopefulness that Polanski is talking about. And they don't see the Labour Party as the site for that profound rejection of reform, for that rejection of this kind of far-right politics, this politics of hostility, this politics of othering and alienation, and performative cruelty. They've recognised that Labour is far too willing to, to dance that dance towards reform. And in fact, actually, I think you were telling me earlier that Rob Yates, the person who's just won, he was actually previously a Labour councillor, and he said he'd left Labour because he felt the party was participating too much in the demonisation of migrants, and he joined the Greens instead, where he's just won as a Green councillor
in Kent, right? This is
Kent,
like prime anti-refugee
well,
area.
that council has declared a kind of migration emergency in the council, but people, at least for this seat, aren't buying it. But I think it's just really interesting that Labour is going to be is just no longer being seen as the place to go if what you want to do is reject reform, because it's not just that people want to reject Nigel Farage, which I think is like the mistake that people sometimes make when they think about why people aren't voting reform or what puts them off. They want to reject that politics wholesale, and they don't trust the Labour Party to not be entangled in that politics in some way as well. Look, I will say, I think Kent is also a case where, last year Reform won that council. They had 57 out of 81 of the seats in Kent Council. Now they've only got 47. They've lost 10 seats, including this one. And they have run it, pretty badly, right? They have spent thousands, I think it's something like £150,000 on like political consultants. They've upped council tax by 4% when they said they weren't going to up council tax at all. They've given contracts to reform backers. And there's also, we've seen like leaked videos of their infighting and their inability to hold meetings. It's not necessarily the case that. Well, it's not necessarily the case that people haven't voted. If there's one reason that they haven't voted reform in the same numbers is because actually they got such a bad lot with the reform councillors a year ago. But that still doesn't explain why people are voting for the Greens. And I think that's actually, when you look at the positive reasons why they're voting for the Greens and not for Labour, that gives you a real clue as to what, in a lot of these places where you expect them to think differently, what people really think about the politics of reform.
That's interesting as well. What's also interesting to look at is Labour's attitude as well just has fallen totally flat. They looked at Gorton and Denton where they said, you can't vote Green, they're going to feed drugs to your kids and legalise prostitution. They're doing all that stuff again, like the hypnosis story and stuff like that, without meaningfully engaging with the policy prescriptions of the Green Party at all. And we're watching them flounder. These are the people who thought that outside of like the soft left of the Labour Party, the kind of cohort of voters to their left was tiny. It was 5% of, like, as I kind of joked about before, like Trotskyists and the far left as they've been described, rather than, a kind of 20-25% of the country who really do want like a proper social democratic prospectus for government, because that's really all the Greens are offering. Yeah. It's not far left, it's not hugely radical outside of some things, right? It's mostly just social democratic reformism that Labour have rejected. And I think the press haven't covered this either, outside of some kind of more kind of exacting members of the journalist profession in the mainstream media. They've not realised this, and they thought they could disregard the Corbynites as being a sect of the Labour Party, and not, lots of people, especially younger people aged 18 to 40, who never knew the social democratic consensus, wanting to return to what generations before them had in terms of the welfare state, public ownership, public investment, and a smaller gap between the poor and the rich.
Yeah, I mean, there are other things they want as well. People aren't stupid, right? You only have to look at the geopolitical situation at the moment to know that an absolutely crucial feature, not just for our country, but for many countries, is energy security. We're going to be hit so hard by what's happened in Iran, just as we were hit so hard by what happened in Ukraine. And the Greens, have always been, in some sense, about energy security. That's not how they would put it. They're about, the climate, about the climate and net zero. But achieving that is to achieve energy security. It is to, as it were, not be reliant on, Iran closing the Strait of Hormuz, or like the US bombing some country and disrupting oil supplies. So whereas reform is the opposite of that. Reform is like, oh no, we just need to like get more oil out of the North Sea, and we should back Trump. I mean, people don't want, just from a kind of very sensible position of what is the right thing to do for us as a country, the Greens have been offering it all along. And like Labour is making noises about, has made noises about, Ed Miliband obviously is very keen on this kind of stuff, but they don't platform it as a policy, right? They don't ever say like, But maybe they will now, actually. Maybe that will be
they've
something
talked
that will
about getting
change.
off the fossil fuel roller coaster. And you know what? Labour's rhetoric is fine. And I think Ed Miliband is probably one of the only members of the cabinet who has his head screwed on. He's the only one who's kind of really done proper policy proposals rather than just doing it off the cuff like all the other cabinet members do because they didn't spend any time preparing for government like Ed Miliband did. But there's a stranglehold on his policy prescriptions insofar as he has to deal with what the Treasury gives him in the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, which he doesn't get because they had a £28 billion plan that they cut before the election, right? They were already losing voters to the Greens with Carla Denny and Adrian Ramsey in charge based upon this huge climb down for one of their most popular policies. And people wanted these kind of things to happen quickly, and they've done the opposite. They've slowed that down. They've reduced investment at a time when energy security, as you say, incredibly critical. And whilst Ed Miliband can make all the right moves, he can make all the right moves in terms of what he plans to do. But as long as, Rachel Reeves and James Murray and the Treasury don't open up the purse strings to give him the capital investment he needs for the kind of mass scale, and probably what we really need is publicly owned energy to sell to ourselves at cost to reduce bills and to improve the security and improve public security by having it under control of the state rather than an international corporation who could pull out investment at any moment. We won't actually see the real industrial strategy that's necessary to turn the economy around. Thank you very much, Stephen, for joining me this evening.
Thank you very much. Thank you again for the amazing impression. 2.5 minutes long or whatever it was.
Oh my God. I mean, again, as long as people at home enjoyed it, clearly the Novara Media accounts team are going to be very pleased about it because we've got so many super chats because of it, so at the very least. Thank you everyone for tuning in tonight. And a final reminder to fill in the audience survey this weekend if you haven't yet. That link is novara.media/survey. Again, the link is in the description. Come back on Monday for another live stream from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.